You don't belong here. Leave! Now! What did she do? She's not even fighting back, Rack. I've already done enough. You always come back, no matter what. Because this matters more.
Refil Sihul didn't argue, didn't plead. She simply removed her ID badge, placed it on the table, and walked away in silence. No one in that room could have imagined that in less than 24 hours, those same people would force to stand up and face the truth about who she really was, and why leaving at 5 every day had never meant she cared any less. Before this story begins, tell us, where are you watching from today? The soft golden sunlight filtered through the towering glass panels of Mahlangu Crown Holdings headquarters in Santon, Johannesburg. The city was already awake. Luxury cars lined the streets. Professionals in tailored suits moved with purpose, and the rhythm of ambition pulsed through every corner of the financial district. Inside the 21st floor office, everything reflected precision and ardor. Desks were spotless, screens glowed with financial models, and quiet conversations blended into the low hum of productivity. This was not just a workplace, it was a place where reputations were built, where excellence was expected, and where even the smallest deviation could be noticed. Refiwi Sihul sat at her desk near the window, her posture straight, her movements deliberate. She wore a cream-toned blouse paired with a fitted blazer, simple yet elegant. Her eyes moved quickly across the data on her screen, fingers typing with steady confidence. She had already been working for nearly an hour. Her reports were always on time. Her numbers were always accurate. Her presence, however, was almost invisible. She did not engage in idle conversations. She did not linger at coffee stations. She did not stay late to be seen. And every day, without exception, she would shut down her computer and leave. To some, that detail seemed small. To others, it was everything. Across the room, Zinhele Kumhalo leaned slightly toward her colleague, lowering her voice. "She's leaving at 5 again today," she whispered. Her colleague glanced toward Rafilwi, then shrugged. "She always does." Zinlo frowned slightly. "But this is a high-performance team," she said. "Everyone stays late." Her colleague didn't respond, because deep down everyone knew the truth. Rafilwi's work never fell behind. Deadlines were never missed. And yet something about her routine didn't fit the unspoken culture of the office. The glass doors of the executive hallway opened. Palesa Mokoina walked in. Her presence shifted the energy of the room immediately. She wore a sharply tailored charcoal suit, her heels clicking softly but firmly against the polished floor. Her gaze was focused. Her expression composed someone who had earned her position through discipline and control. People straightened slightly as she passed. Conversations stopped. Screens became the center of attention again. Palesa didn't need to say anything. Her presence was enough. She paused briefly near the center of the room, her eyes scanning across the team, not searching, evaluating. Her gaze stopped just for a moment on Refilve, watching, observing, measuring. Refil didn't look up. She continued working, unaware of the attention or simply choosing not to acknowledge it. Palisa turned away and continued toward her office, but the thought stayed with her. The office atmosphere has shifted into its midday rhythm. Some employees gathered in small groups, discussing projects over lunch. Others remained at their desks, pushing through tasks. Refilwi was still working. Her lunch sat unopened beside her keyboard, a simple container, neatly packed, untouched. Zinle noticed. "You're not taking a break?" she asked, standing nearby. Refilwi glanced up briefly. "I will later," she replied calmly. Zinle hesitated, then nodded. But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more behind that answer. Refilwi saved her final file of the day. She reviewed it once, closed her laptop, and began to organize her desk. No rush, no hesitation. Just a routine she had followed every single day. She stood up, picked up her bag, and walked toward the exit. That was when the silence began. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious. But one by one, people noticed. Heads lifted slightly. Eyes followed. Zinle glanced at the clock, then back at Refilwi. Again, Paleza's office door opened. Perfect timing. She stepped out just as Refilwi reached the center of the floor. Their eyes met. for the first time that day. Refilwe gave a small, polite nod, then continued walking. Palisa didn't move, didn't speak, but her gaze followed every step until Refilwe disappeared behind the glass doors. The office didn't return to normal immediately because something had just happened. Something small, but significant. Palisa turned slowly, her expression unreadable. Zine, she said. Zinle straightened instantly. Yes, ma'am. Is she always like this? A simple question, but one that carried weight. Zinle hesitated. Every day, she answered. Palesa nodded once, not in approval, not in understanding, just acknowledgement. Then she turned and walked back into her office, closing the door behind her. Inside, she stood by the window, looking out at the city, her mind no longer on reports or meetings, but on a single detail, a routine, a pattern, one that didn't align with her definition of commitment. And in that moment, a decision was already beginning to form, one that would soon change everything. Just 16 minutes after Refilwe Sehul had walked out of the office, Palesa Mokoena was still standing by the window in her private office on the 21st floor. The city below was alive. Traffic moved in steady streams. Lights flickered on across glass towers. People were heading home, but inside her mind something refused to settle. She turned away from the window and walked back to her desk. The silence in the room felt heavier than usual, not because anything had gone wrong, but because something didn't sit right. Not a mistake. Not yet. But a question. She pressed the income zincle. Come in. Within seconds, there was a soft knock. Yes, ma'am? Palisa didn't look up immediately. She flipped through a set of reports on her desk, scanning numbers that she had already reviewed earlier that day. Sit, she said. Zinli hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking a seat. Palisa finally raised her eyes. How long has Refilwe been working in your team? Zinli straightened. Almost 4 years. Palisa's expression didn't change. And in those 4 years, has she ever missed a deadline? Zinli shook her head. No. Any performance issues? No, ma'am. Palisa tapped her pen lightly against the desk, a steady rhythm, measured, controlled. And yet, she said, she leaves at 5 every day. It wasn't a question, it was an observation. Zinle nodded carefully. Yes. Palisa leaned back in her chair. In this company, she said slowly, people earn their place by going beyond what is required. Her voice was calm, but firm. Staying late is not just about time, it's about commitment. Zine opened her mouth, then closed it again, because she wasn't sure if she was allowed to disagree. Palisa noticed. Do you have something to say? Zinil hesitated, then spoke. Her work is always done, she said, sometimes even earlier than the rest of us. Palisa held her gaze. And what does that tell you? Zinil paused. That she's efficient, she said. Palisa tilted her head slightly, or that she's doing the minimum just well enough. The room fell silent. Zinhe didn't respond, not because she agreed, but because she didn't know how to challenge that statement. Palisa stood up, walked back toward the window. You see, she continued, culture is not built on what people say. It's built on what they tolerate. She turned. If one person decides that 5 o'clock is enough, others will follow. Zinho looked down at her hands, because somewhere deep inside she knew that wasn't entirely true. But she also knew this wasn't a conversation she could win. The next morning, the office was already in motion. Emails were being sent. Meetings were being scheduled. Deadlines were approaching. Refilwe arrived at her desk, as she always did quietly, without drawing attention. She greeted no one, not out of arrogance, but out of habit. She placed her bag down, turned on her computer, and began working, unaware that something had already been set in motion. Across the floor, Palesan stepped out of her office earlier than usual. Her eyes moved across the team, not casually, not passively, but intention. She stopped near Refilwe's desk. Good morning, she said. Refilwe looked up. Good morning, ma'am. Her tone was respectful, neutral, unassuming. Palesa glanced briefly at the screen. Financial projections, detailed, precise. How long have you been here this morning? Palesa asked. Since 7:10. Palisa nodded once, early, as expected. And you plan to leave at 5? The question came without warning. Refill didn't hesitate. Yes, no apology, just clarity. Palisa studied her for a moment. Do you believe that is enough? Refill met her gaze. Calm, steady. I believe completing my responsibilities is enough. A simple answer, but one that carried weight. Palisa's expression hardened just slightly. In this company, she said, we don't measure contribution by what is enough. Refil didn't look away. Then perhaps, she replied quietly, we measure it differently. The air shifted, not dramatically, but enough. For the first time, this wasn't just observation. It was conflict. Palisa straightened. Be careful with that mindset, she said, then turned and walked away, leaving behind a silence that felt different from before. The tension had spread. Not openly, not loudly, but subtly. People were watching, not just Refiwi, but the clock. Zinle glanced at her screen, then at the time, then back at Refiwi. She could feel it. Something was about to happen. Refiwi, however, continued working as if nothing had changed. No rush, no hesitation, just focus. She saved her file, closed her laptop, and stood up. The same routine, the same calm, the same certainty. She reached for her bag and began to walk. This time the silence wasn't subtle, it was deliberate. Palisa's office door opened, right on cue. She stepped out. Her voice cut through the air. Refilwi. The name echoed across the floor. Refilwi stopped, turned, and in that moment, everything that had been building finally arrived. 3 days after that tense meeting, the atmosphere on the finance floor of Malangu Crown Holdings had noticeably shifted. No official announcement had been made. No internal memo had been sent, but everyone could feel it. The pressure was building. Refilwi Sehul walked into the office with a cup of black coffee in her hand, as she always did. She arrived earlier than most, nearly 40 minutes before official working hours. The morning light was still soft, stretching across empty desks and reflecting off the glass walls. This was the only time of day when the office felt quiet. No constant typing, no urgent phone calls, just silence and focus. Refilfui placed her bag down, opened her laptop, and began working. Numbers filled the screen, familiar, precise, almost like a language, only she truly understood. Financial models, projections, and layered calculations moved under her fingertips with effortless clarity. She worked as if it was second nature. No need to impress, no need to stand out. But her efficiency spoke for itself. About 20 minutes later, the first employees began arriving. The quiet gradually dissolved into movement, doors opening, chairs shifting, soft greetings exchanged. Zinle was among the next to arrive. She placed her bag down and glanced toward Refilwe, offering a small smile. Looks like it's going to be a long day, Zinle said, her voice carrying a hint of fatigue. Refilwe didn't look up immediately. It always is, she replied, continuing to type. Zinle let out a small laugh. Yeah, but today feels longer than usual. Refil paused for a second, just 1 second, then turned slightly. What happened? Zinle hesitated. Her eyes flicked briefly toward Palisa's glass office at the far end, the blinds still drawn. Palisa sent an email at 6 this morning, she said quietly. She wants all team leads to submit progress reports by the end of the day, and she said everyone should be prepared to stay late. Refilvi said nothing. She turned back to her screen, continued working, but this time her typing slowed slightly. Not because she didn't understand, but because she understood too well. The office was nearly full. The sound of work filled the room, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, printers humming. Then Palisa's office door opened. She stepped out, dressed in a sharply tailored dark gray suit, her posture firm, her expression controlled. Conversations lowered immediately. No one needed to be told. Everyone adjusted. She walked toward the center of the floor. We need to talk, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Everyone stopped, looked up. The Santon Extension project is entering its most critical phase, she continued. I don't want to hear any excuses for delays. Her eyes moved across the room, pausing slightly longer at Refilwe. I also don't want to see anyone leaving this office while work is unfinished. A few people nodded, others looked down. Refilwe remained still, unreactive. Palesa stepped forward. And to be clear, she added, her tone sharpening, from today, everyone in this room stays until the job is done. No exceptions. The air tightened. Zine gripped her pen slightly. Someone across the room swallowed hard. No one spoke. No one questioned, except one person. Refilwe raised her hand. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Palisa turned. Is there a problem, Refilwi? Her tone carried pressure. Refilwi stood up, not quickly, not slowly, just deliberately. I'd like to clarify something, she said calmly. My contract includes flexible working hours approved 4 years ago. Is that still valid? Silence, but heavy. Salesa smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We're talking about responsibility, she said, not contracts. My responsibility is to complete my work, Refiwe replied, and I always do. Eyes shifted, back and forth. No one dared intervene. Palesa stepped closer. Responsibility also means commitment, she said, being willing to do more when necessary. Refil nodded slightly. I understand, she said, and I do stay when work isn't finished. She paused. Just a moment. But if the work is complete, staying just to appear busy doesn't add value. The words were quiet, not aggressive, but they landed. People lowered their eyes. Zinel held her breath. Talisa stared at her, no smile this time. We'll see, she said coldly, then turned and walked back into her office. The door closed, a soft click, but it echoed. The room slowly came back to life, but not the same way, not naturally. Something had shifted. Zine leaned toward Refilwe. You shouldn't have said that, she whispered. Refilwe looked at her. Maybe, she said, but if no one says it, nothing changes. Zinhol didn't respond, not because she disagreed, but because she knew what it cost to speak up. Across the room, people were still watching Refilwe, not just with curiosity, but judgment. Some thought she was brave, some thought she was reckless, and some felt uncomfortable because her presence forced them to question themselves. Refilwe sat down, continued working, as if nothing had happened. But deep inside, she knew a line had been crossed. And from that moment on, nothing would be the same again. The entire finance floor fell into a silence so sharp it felt almost deliberate. Refilwe stood still, her hand still resting lightly on the strap of her bag, her expression unchanged. Palesa Mokoina stood a few steps away, her posture firm, her presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. Where do you think you're going? She asked. Her voice was calm, but it carried authority. Refilwe met her gaze. I've completed my work for today, she replied. A simple answer, clear, direct. Palisa took a step closer. In case it wasn't clear this morning, she said, no one leaves this office while work is still ongoing. Refilwe didn't move. Is there unfinished work assigned to me? She asked. The question was respectful, but precise. Palesa's jaw tightened slightly. This is not about assigned tasks, she said. It's about being part of a team. Refilwe nodded once. I am part of the team, she replied, and I fulfilled my responsibilities. The tension in the room grew heavier. People avoided eye contact. Some stared at their screens. Others watched quietly, unable to look away. Palesa crossed her arms. For 4 years, she said, you followed your own schedule as if the rules don't apply to you. Refilwe remained calm. I followed the agreement stated in my contract. A murmur almost formed but quickly disappeared. Palisa's voice hardened. This is not about contracts anymore. This is about standards. Refwe held her ground. Standards should be based on results, she said. And what results justify walking out at 5 every single day? Palisa challenged. Refilwe paused just a second. Consistent performance, she answered. Accuracy, delivery, accountability. The words landed clearly, but instead of easing the situation, they sharpened it. Palesa stepped even closer. Or perhaps, she said quietly, it's convenience. That word shifted everything. For the first time, something flickered across Refilwe's eyes. Not anger, not fear, but recognition, not of the accusation, but of what it represented. A misunderstanding, one she had chosen not to explain until now. I don't think that's fair, Refilwe said. Her voice remained controlled, but firmer. Palesa tilted her head. Fairness is not the issue, she replied. Discipline is. A pause. Then, without raising her voice, pack your things. The words cut through the room. No hesitation. No ambiguity. You're done here. The silence that followed was absolute. Zinsi's eyes widened. Someone at the back of the room stopped typing entirely. Refilwe didn't react immediately. She didn't argue, didn't protest, didn't defend herself. Instead, she slowly removed her ID badge, looked at it for a brief moment, then placed it gently on the nearest desk. Her movements were calm, deliberate, almost graceful. I understand, she said. No emotion in her voice, no resistance, She picked up her bag, turned, and began to walk. No one stopped her. No one spoke, because no one knew what to say. The glass doors opened, closed, and just like that she was gone. The room didn't move, not right away. It was as if everyone needed a moment to process what had just happened. Zinhle looked toward Palesa, waiting, expecting something, an explanation, a justification. But Palesa said nothing. She simply turned and walked back to her office. Her heels echoed against the floor, each step precise, each step controlled, until the door closed behind her. Inside, she stood still. Not at the window this time, but at her desk, looking down at the reports, but not seeing them. For a brief moment, just a moment, something unsettled moved beneath her composure. Not doubt, not regret, but a question. Had she just enforced a standard, or had she overlooked something? She pushed the thought away, sat down, and reached for the next file, because in her world decisions were not meant to be questioned. Outside the building, the evening air felt cooler than usual. Refil stepped onto the pavement. The city moved around her. Cars passing, people talking, life continuing, as if nothing had happened. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder, looked straight ahead, and began walking. Not fast, not slow, just steady. There was no panic in her steps, no urgency, because deep down she knew something no one inside that building knew yet. And when the truth finally surfaced, it wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be dramatic, but it would be enough to make everyone look back at this moment differently. The next morning, the finance floor of Malangu Crown Holdings felt unusually quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that follows something unresolved. People had arrived earlier than usual, not because of deadlines, but because of what had happened the day before. No one said it out loud, but everyone was thinking about it. Refilwe, the way she had stood there, the way she had left, without argument, without hesitation, without fear. Zinli sat at her desk, staring at her screen, but she hadn't typed a single word in the past 3 minutes. Her mind kept replaying the moment. Pack your things. The tone, the finality. She glanced toward Refilwe's desk, empty, neat, untouched, as if she had never been there, and somehow that felt wrong. Palesa Mokoena stepped onto the floor. Her presence still commanded attention, but something had shifted. People didn't look at her the same way. Not openly, not directly, but subtly. There was hesitation now. A pause before eye contact, a carefulness in posture. Palesa noticed. Of course she did. She noticed everything, but she didn't react. She walked to her office, closed the door, and sat down. Her desk was organized. Her schedule was full. Her inbox was already overflowing. Everything looked exactly the same, but something felt different. She reached for the first report, opened it, read the numbers. But they didn't hold her attention because her mind kept returning to one thing. Not the argument, not the confrontation, but the silence. The way Refilwe had said, I understand. No resistance, no attempt to stay, no urgency, as if she had expected it. Palisa frowned slightly. That thought didn't sit well with her because in her world, people fought to stay. They negotiated, they explained, they defended themselves. They needed the job. But Refilwe had simply walked away. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Come in. Zinhel stepped inside, holding a file. Morning, ma'am. Paleza nodded. Leave it there. Zinle placed the file on the desk, but didn't leave immediately. Paleza looked up. Yes? Zinle hesitated, then spoke. There's something you should see. Paleza's expression tightened slightly. What is it? Zinle slid a printed document across the desk. Palesa picked it up. Her eyes moved across the page once, then again, slower, more carefully. It wasn't just a report, it was a summary. Performance metrics, team comparisons, project outcomes, and at the top of the page a name, Refiwe Sihu. Palisa's fingers stilled. Zinli spoke quietly. She's been leading the Santan extension, financial modeling unofficially. Palisa looked at sharply. Unofficially. Zinli nodded. She never asked for recognition, but most of the core projections they're hers. Palisa's eyes returned to the page. The numbers were precise, detailed, structured in a way that showed deep understanding, not just of finance, but of strategy. This was never brought to my attention, Palisa said. Zinli hesitated. She didn't bring it forward, and no one else did either. Zinli didn't answer, because the truth was uncomfortable. People had seen her work, They had relied on it, but they hadn't acknowledged it. Because she didn't stay late, because she didn't speak up, because she didn't fit the image. Palesa stood up, walked toward the window, the paper still in her hand. For the first time, something deeper than control began to surface. Not doubt, not regret, but awareness. A gap between what she had seen and what had actually been there. Behind her, Zinle spoke again. There's more, Palesa turned. Zinle placed another document on the desk. This came in early this morning. Palesa walked back, picked it up, opened it. Her eyes moved quickly, then stopped. Her expression changed subtly, but undeniably. This can't be correct, she said. Zinle didn't respond because she knew it was. The document wasn't internal. It came from an external audit firm, a partner, one of the largest in the region. And the subject line was clear: Lead Financial Architect Confirmation, Santan Extension Project. Palesa read the name again. Refiu Sehul, not as an analyst, not as a contributor, but as the primary architect behind the financial structure of the project, a role far beyond her official position, a role that required trust, authority, recognition. Palesa lowered the document slowly. Her mind moved quickly now, connecting details, moments, conversations, the consistency, the precision, the confidence, and the silence. She had dismissed all of it because of a single pattern. Leaving at 5, the office felt different again, not because anything had changed outwardly, but because something had shifted internally. Zine stood by the door, waiting, unsure if she should say anything else. Palesa remained still, looking at the documents. Then finally, get me everything related to her work, she said. Her voice was calm, but no longer rigid. Zinle nodded. Yes, ma'am. She turned to leave, then paused. Ma, Palesa looked up. For what it's worth, she never missed anything. The sentence hung in the air, not as a defense, but as a fact. Palesa didn't respond immediately. She simply nodded once. Zinhe left, closing the door quietly behind her. Alone again, Palesa sat down slowly. The document spread out in front of her, clear, undeniable. And for the first time since yesterday, she didn't feel certain. Not about her decision, not about her judgment, not about the standard she believed she had enforced. Because now there was something she couldn't ignore. She hadn't just let someone go. She had dismissed the value she hadn't fully understood. And somewhere beyond this building, that truth was already beginning to move, quietly but steadily, toward a moment that would be impossible to reverse. The conference room on the 21st floor was filled with a tension no one could ignore. Senior managers sat around the long glass table, documents spread out in front of them, screens displaying projections, numbers, timelines. Everything looked structured, controlled, but beneath that surface, something was off. Palesa Mokoena stood at the head of the table, composed, focused, at least on the outside. We need to finalize the financial alignment for the Santan Extension project today, she said. Her voice was steady, but sharper than usual. We're already behind schedule. A few heads nodded. Others flipped through their documents, trying to keep up, trying to make sense of what no longer felt clear. Let's proceed, Palesa continued. Zinhel, walk us through the updated model. Zinhel stood up slowly, her hands slightly tense as she adjusted the papers in front of her. Yes, ma'am. She turned to the screen, clicked to the next slide. Numbers appeared, complex, layered, but something was missing. Zine paused, just for a moment, then continued. As you can see, the projected return has been recalculated based on revised cost inputs. Her voice was steady, but not confident, not like before, because she knew. Everyone in that room knew. This model was not complete. The first interruption came. Something doesn't align here, one of the senior analysts said. He leaned forward, pointing at the screen. The risk distribution is inconsistent. Zinil froze for a fraction of a second, then responded. We adjusted the variables based on the latest data. He shook his head. That's not the issue. He tapped the table lightly. The structure itself, it's missing a layer. Silence. Police gaze sharpened. What layer? The analyst hesitated, then said it. The core modeling framework. The room stilled, because everyone understood what that meant, or rather who that meant. Zine lowered her eyes. Not in shame, but in recognition, because she had tried. They all had. But none of them had built it the way Refilwe did. The discussion had shifted, not about timelines, not about deliverables, but about a gap no one could ignore anymore. We can reconstruct it, someone suggested. It will take time, another added. How much time? Pelesa asked. No one answered immediately, because the honest answer was not acceptable. Finally, Zinle spoke. If we rebuild from scratch, at least 3 weeks. 3 weeks, the number hung in the air, heavy, unavoidable. Palisa's jaw tightened. That's not an option, she said. A silence followed. Longer this time, more uncomfortable, because for the first time the consequences were real, not theoretical, not internal. Real. Deadlines would be missed. Partnerships could be affected. Reputation at risk. One of the external partners spoke, his tone calm, measured. But there is another option. All eyes turned. What option? Palisa asked. He glanced down at his notes, then back up. The original architect. No one needed clarification. The room already knew. Palisa didn't respond immediately. Her posture remained firm, but something in her expression shifted, subtly, because now this was no longer about internal dynamics. This was about outcome, about responsibility, about a decision that had already been made. The meeting paused, not officially, but effectively. People stopped speaking, stopped presenting, stopped pretending they had control because they didn't. Not fully, not without her. Palesa walked to the window, looked out at the city, the same view, the same buildings, the same movement, but everything felt different because now she had to confront something she had avoided. Not just a person, but a reality. She had made a decision based on what she saw, but she had not seen everything. Behind her, Zinle spoke quietly. We can reach out to her. The words were careful, not demanding, not pushing, just an option. Pelisa didn't turn around. She's no longer with the company, she said, a statement, clear, final. Zinle took a breath. That doesn't change what she built. Silence. Again. But this time it carried weight. Palisa turned slowly, her expression no longer rigid. Not fully, but different, more aware, more human. Get me her contact, she said. Zinli blinked, just once, then nodded. Yes, ma'am. As the meeting dissolved, people began to gather their things, quietly. No one spoke loudly. No one made eye contact for long, because everyone understood. This wasn't just about a project. It was about a mistake, one that couldn't be ignored anymore. Palisa remained in the room after everyone left, standing alone, looking at the empty chairs, the unfinished slides, the incomplete model, and for the first time she allowed herself to think the question she had avoided since yesterday, not whether Refilwe had been right, but whether she had been wrong. And somewhere beyond the glass walls of that building, the answer was already beginning to take shape. The afternoon light stretched the glass walls of Malanga Crown Holdings, casting long reflections across the polished floors. Inside Palesa Mokoina's office, the air felt heavier than usual, not because of noise, but because of what remained unsaid. She sat at her desk, Refilwi's file open in front of her. Page after page, report after report, every detail precise, every calculation consistent, every projection structured with a clarity that was impossible to ignore. This wasn't ordinary work. This wasn't something someone did quietly in the background. This was leadership. And yet, she had never seen it, or perhaps she had never looked closely enough. Palisa leaned back slightly, her fingers resting still on the edge of the desk. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about control, or performance, or authority. She was thinking about judgment. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Come in. Zinhal stepped in holding a small folder. I found her contact details, she said. Palesa nodded. Leave it. Zinhal placed the folder down but lingered, as if waiting. Palesa noticed. You have something to say? Zinhal hesitated, then spoke. I don't think she's going to come back easily. Palisa's expression didn't change. I'm not asking her to come back, she said. Zinle looked at her. Then what are you asking? A brief pause. Palisa glanced at the folder. Clarity. The word was simple, but it carried more weight than she intended, because deep down, she knew it wasn't just about the project anymore. Palisa picked up her phone. She stared at the number for a moment, just a moment, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness. This was not a conversation she was used to having. She didn't call people she had already dismissed. She didn't revisit decisions. She didn't reconsider. But this time she dialed. The line rang once, twice. Then, hello, Refilwi's voice. Calm, clear, unchanged. Palisa straightened slightly. A brief silence, not awkward, just measured. I know, Refilwe replied. No surprise, no tension, just recognition. I'd like to speak with you, Palisa said. Another pause. About the project, Refu asked. Direct, as always. Yes, then you already know what's missing. The words landed quietly, but precisely. Palisa's grip on the phone tightened slightly. I'd prefer to discuss it in person. A longer pause this time. Not refusal, but consideration. Tomorrow, refill, we said. 10 a.m. No negotiations, no question. Palise nodded instinctively. Fine, the call ended. The next morning, a quiet cafe just outside the Sant business district became the setting for a meeting neither of them had expected. Refilwe arrived first, dressed simply but with the same quiet elegance, a deep navy dress, minimal accessories. Composed, she sat by the window, a cup of tea in front of her, watching the city move, not waiting, just present. Palisa arrived 3 minutes later, her usual precision intact, but her expression different, less rigid, more aware. She approached the table. Refilwe looked up. Good morning. Morning, Palisa replied. She sat down. For a moment neither spoke, not out of discomfort, but because this was no longer a formal setting. No titles, no hierarchy, just two people, and a decision that needed to be understood. Palisa spoke first. The model you built, we can't complete it without you. No preamble, no justification, just truth. Refilwe nodded slightly. I assumed that would happen. No arrogance, just clarity. Palisa exhaled softly. Why didn't you say anything? The question came out more personal than she intended. Refilwe looked at her. Would it have changed your decision? Silence. Because the answer was obvious. Refilwe continued. I didn't hide my work, she said. I just didn't present it the way people expect. Palisa leaned forward slightly. And what way is that? Visibility, Refil replied. Presence, staying late, speaking loudly. She paused. I chose to let the work speak. Palisa held her gaze. And you think that's enough? Refil didn't hesitate. It should be a simple sentence, but it carried something deeper, a standard, not just for herself, but for how she believed work should be valued. The conversation shifted from the project to something more fundamental. I misjudged you, Palisa said. The words didn't come easily, but they came. Refilwe didn't react immediately, not with satisfaction, not with relief, just acknowledgement. It happens, she said, not dismissive, not forgiving, just real. Palisa looked down briefly, then back up. We need your help, she said. Refil studied her, not as an employee, not as a subordinate, but as an equal. For the project, Palisa added. Refilwe shook her head slightly. That's not the real question. Palisa frowned. Then what is? Refilwe's voice remained calm. Why do you need my help? The question shifted everything. Because now it wasn't about fixing a model. It was about understanding a mistake and whether anything had truly changed. The quiet cafe began to fill with the soft murmur of conversations, cups clinking gently against saucers and the steady rhythm of a city moving forward. But at the small table by the window, everything felt still. Refilwe sat with her hands loosely wrapped around her cup of tea, calm, composed, present. Across from her, Palesa Mokoina leaned forward slightly, her posture no longer rigid, but not entirely at ease either, because this conversation was no longer about authority. It was about accountability. I need your help, Palesa said again, not as a demand this time, but as a request. Refilwe watched her quietly. And if I say no? She asked, no challenge. No edge, just honesty. Palesa didn't answer immediately because for the first time she understood that she couldn't control the outcome. That's your decision, she said finally. Refilwe nodded slightly, then leaned back, studying her, not with judgment but with clarity. For 4 years, she said, I worked within a system that valued visibility over substance. Palesa held her gaze. And you stayed. Yes. Why? A simple question, but one that mattered. Refilwe paused, not because she didn't have an answer, but because she chose her words carefully. Because the work mattered, she said, even if the recognition didn't. The sentence settled between them, quiet. But powerful, the conversation shifted again, from past to possibility. If I come back, Refilwe said, it won't be under same conditions. Palisa nodded slowly. I expected that, Refilwe continued. I won't stay late just to prove commitment. I won't measure my value by how visible I am in a room. Her voice remained calm, but firm. And I won't accept a culture that confuses presence with performance. Palisa listened, fully, not interrupting, not correcting, because now she understood, or at least she was beginning to. What do you propose? Palisa asked. Refil didn't hesitate. A results-based structure, she said. Clear deliverables, transparent recognition, and flexibility that is respected, not tolerated. The words were measured, not emotional, but intentional. Palisa leaned back slightly, processing, not resisting. Because everything Refilwe was saying made sense, not just logically, but practically. This wasn't about one person, it was about a system, one that had worked until it didn't. Palisa spoke. If we implement that, eating changes more than just your role. Refilwe nodded. I know, and if others push back, they will, Refilwe said, no hesitation. But that doesn't mean it's wrong. A quiet truth, one that didn't need emphasis. The cafe noise continued around them, unaware, uninvolved. But at that table, a shift was happening. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. Palisa looked down briefly, then back up. When I made that decision yesterday, she began, then stopped, because finishing that sentence meant admitting something she wasn't used to admitting. Refilwe waited, not rushing her, not helping her, just allowing the moment. I thought I was protecting a standard, Palisa said finally. Refilwe nodded. And now? Palisa exhaled softly. Now I'm not sure what that standard was built on. Silence. But this time it wasn't heavy. It was honest. Refilwe placed her cup down. I'm not interested in proving a point, she said. I know. I'm interested in doing meaningful work in an environment that understands its value. Palisa met her gaze. And if that environment changes, Refilwe held her eyes. Then I'll consider returning, a clear answer. Not a promise, not a rejection, a possibility. Palisa nodded slowly. For the first time since the conversation began, there was no resistance in her posture. No defensiveness, just acceptance. Give me 48 hours, she said. Refilwe didn't respond immediately, then nodded once. All right. As they stood up to leave, there was no handshake, no formal conclusion. Because this wasn't a negotiation, it was a shift in understanding. One that couldn't be finalized in a single conversation. Outside, the sunlight had grown stronger. The city continued as it always did, unaware of the quiet change that had just begun. But inside Palisa's mind, everything was moving, faster now, clearer, because for the first time she wasn't trying to enforce a system, she was trying to rebuild it. And whether that would be enough was something the next 48 hours would decide. 6 months after the moment that changed everything, the glass tower of Malangu Crown Holdings stood under the warm glow of the Santan sunset once again. But this time everything felt different. There were no longer lingering glances when the clock approached 5. No quiet judgment when someone stood up to leave. No silent competition over who stayed the latest. Instead, there was movement, natural, unforced. People closed their laptops, gathered their things, exchanged small smiles with colleagues. Some headed home, some stayed because they needed to, not because they felt they had to prove something. The office had not become less demanding, but it had become more human. Zinle Kumholo stood from her desk, sliding her chair in neatly. She paused for a moment, looking around, noticing the small changes, the ease in people's movements, the absence of tension that once filled the space. She glanced at the clock, then picked up her bag. See you tomorrow, she said to a colleague. See you, he replied. No hesitation, no guilt, just normal. On the 23rd floor, Refilwe Sehul stood by the window, the city stretching out beneath her. The same view, the same skyline, but not the same meaning. She was no longer the quiet analyst at the edge of the room, no longer the one being observed, measured, misunderstood. But she hadn't changed who she was. She still arrived early, still worked with precision, still left at 5 up, not because she could, but because she chose to. And now that choice was understood. Behind her, the door opened softly. Pales Mokoena stepped in. Her presence was still composed, still strong, but no longer rigid. There was a difference now, subtle, but real. You're living on time again, Palesa said. Not a criticism, not even a question, just acknowledgement. Refilwe turned slightly. As always, Palesa allowed herself a small smile. I used to think that was a problem, and now? Refilwe asked. Palesa looked out at the city. Now I think I didn't understand the full picture. A simple truth, one that had taken time to reach. She stepped closer. The flexible work structure is working, Palesa said. Refilwe nodded. People are more focused, Palesa continued, more accountable. She paused and less exhausted. Refilwe feel her faint smiles because they are not performing for visibility anymore, she said. They're delivering results. Palesa looked at her, not as a superior, not as someone in control, but as someone who had learned something. I had to relearn how to lead, she admitted. That's not easy, Refilwe replied. No, Palesa said, but it was necessary. A brief silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just reflective. I went to the rehabilitation center last week, Palesa said suddenly. Refilwe's eyes shifted slightly. My mother, Palesa clarified. She insisted. She looked down briefly. I didn't go inside right away. I just stood there watching. She lifted her gaze again. There were so many people fighting battles no one sees. Refilwe didn't interrupt, didn't need to. And people like you, Palisa continued, carrying responsibility beyond what we measure in an office. Refilwe exhaled softly. Everyone is carrying something, she said. We just don't always see it. At 5:10 p.m., Refilwe picked up her bag. No rush, no hesitation. I should go, she said. Palisa nodded. Of course. Refil paused at the door, then turned back slightly. Thank you for listening. Palisa held her gaze. Thank you for staying true to your standards. Refilwe nodded once, then left. Later that evening, an internal message was sent across the company. Short, simple, clear. Performance is not measured by time spent, but by value delivered. From today forward, we recognize results, not presence. No long explanation, no dramatic announcement, just a shift. One that would shape everything moving forward. This story doesn't end with a dramatic victory. No one was destroyed. No one lost everything. Instead, something quieter happened. People began to understand, to question, to listen. And sometimes that kind of change lasts longer than anything loud ever could. And somewhere in an office, a hallway, or even in your own life, you might find yourself asking, have you ever judged someone based on what you could see without realizing what you couldn't? If you have, maybe it's time to look again. 6 months later, Malangu Crown Holdings was no longer a place where people had to stay late just to prove their worth. The evenings became lighter not because there was less work, but because there was more trust. Refilwe still left the office at exactly 5 p.m. every day, but now no one watched her with judgment. Instead, there were small nods, quiet smiles, subtle acknowledgements that everyone had a life beyond their desk. Palisa didn't leave the company, but she changed the way she led. She learned to ask before concluding, to listen before judging. Zinkley and the others began to speak up, no longer afraid that silence was the only way to survive. As for Refilwe, she no longer needed to prove who she was. She simply continued living by her values, giving her best at work, and showing up where she was truly needed. Sometimes, real change doesn't come from winning or losing, but from people finally beginning to understand one another. These stories isn't about who was right or wrong, it's about how we choose to see others. Too often in life, we judge people based only on what we can see, when they arrive, when they leave, how they behave in a single moment. But what we don't see is often the most important part. Refilwe never felt the need to explain herself because she believed her value was reflected in her results, not in her excuses. But the real issue wasn't her silence, it was that no one cared enough to ask. And that's something worth thinking about. Because a lack of understanding doesn't always come from bad intentions. It often comes from the habit of assuming we already know enough. Pilisa wasn't a bad person. She simply believed in a system she thought was fair. But when a system leaves no room for individual circumstances, it becomes pressure instead of standard. And when authority is used without empathy, it can hurt the very people who are trying the hardest, quietly, consistently, and without recognition. My personal perspective is simple. Don't be too quick to judge someone just because you don't understand them. Everyone is carrying a story they haven't shared. And sometimes all it takes is one thoughtful question to completely change the way you see them. Share your thoughts on this story.